Good morning, Bobby, if I may, and good evening, Douglas. Is it Douglas or Doug?
It's either.
Cool. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you both, and I just wanted basically just to start, if I may, with looking at actually your first memories of the school, of actually joining the school, and what do you remember most about the sort of the war years at the school when you first joined?
My first memories of the long walk up the drive, because I was billeted in Moore Park, the old lady, and I had to walk to school every morning, which was a long stretch as far as I was concerned, before I went into the manor. So for 2 terms, I was a day boy, and then eventually they found a place for me at the manor, and that's where I arrived, I think, second or third term of 1940 something, 43, I think it was in those days. Yes. So my memory really is this long drive with the trees on the left-hand side. And I remember also a ploughed field on the right-hand side, which is probably grass now, but it was wartime. And of course, any land that was available was ploughed up and sown with potatoes or whatever the case may be. And that was my memory of that time. I remember walking down the drive, through the arches, and eventually finding our way to my form room, 4B, I think it was, or 4C probably. And those are the first memories, I think.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Bobby, now, what were your first memories of the school? Or what do you
well, I was lucky enough to go to the school in 42, because it was in the middle of the war. They were still bombing home and everything. I lived in North Harrow, and near me lived a man called Derek Hockaday, who's still alive, in fact, a distinguished doctor in Oxford, and who was our hooker, if you remember, Douglas. Derek. And Derek's still going. I still talk to him most weeks. And we used to walk to North Harrow Station, catch the train out to Moore Park, and as Douglas said, the long walk along. But they were I loved that walk along. You know, from no cars, of course, then. The only people who had cars then were either doctors or crooks during the war, you know. And we were still, of course, on 2 ounces of meat a week. It was rationing. I remember to this day eating the rice pudding, which used to come around at lunch. And I remember having 11 helpings of pudding one day just to help me keep my weight up in the 2nd row. But the school, we had a fantastic headmaster with everything I wasn't. Norman Burley, he was small, he was a classic scholar. I was hopeless at it, but he was the most wonderful man who kept the school together. And of course, we had lots of lady teachers, because lots of the young men had gone off, lots of the young teachers had gone off to fight in the war. And so we had lady teachers. And one of them was Mrs. Cherritt, because Cherritt was a master. Mrs. Cherritt taught us. And there's one notable scene when I was sitting in upper 4B in one of those forms that looked out over the grass by the headmaster's house. And in the back row of the form in upper 4B were 2 people who later became notorious as front row forwards at the OMTs, Geoffrey Schilling and Tom Lant, and they were misbehaving. And at one stage, Mrs. Cherritt had to say to them, "If you don't stop, I'll scream." But the lady teachers did a fantastic job, and the school all through the war, I loved it. My 42 to 47, my days at the school. And of course, Douglas will remember this. We had the most wonderful rugby coach in the under-15s, the Reverend D. Davis. And he was master in upper 4B, which I was in. And I was lucky to get in there my first year. And in the 2 years I was in the under-15s, which we played then, we played all the schools. We scored 350 points one year and 360 the other, to about 30. And it was a Reverend D. Davis, who'd been the first 15s coach in 1910, but then it got sent to the back, but he was the most wonderful. Do you remember Douglas?
I do indeed. Yes,
Douglas came along, and I was lucky to be captain in the second year there in the under-15s. And Douglas came along, and you know, we had a riot, didn't we, Douglas?
we enjoyed ourselves very much indeed, I must say. And BD, of course, was the master in charge of the boarding house. So I knew him pretty well, or he knew me better than I knew him, I think, probably. So I learned a lot from him. And of course, he was a Welsh international himself. So he was a very good coach as well. Yes.
I mean, and the aforementioned Mrs. Cherrett was married to Rex Cherrett, and Rex became the head of classics at the school in my time, and retired in the early 1970s. So the circles within circles.
This year is the centenary of the creation of the house system at Merchant Taylors. Which houses were you both in?
Well, Douglas, of course, they were toffee nosed. He was in the Manor, which was still then a boarding house. Douglas, wasn't it?
Well, no, but I was in Gordon House. I think it was. Is there a Gordon House there? It's Scott.
Yes, you boarded. Gracious me, Baker.
Yes, I boarded. But
I was in Hills.
What did you enjoy most about that experience? Was it the opportunity to play sports, or how was it organised?
I just loved the whole school. You know, I was lucky to, initially I went into the Scouts. And then, of course, in those days, when you became 14 or whatever it was, you had to go into the Officer Cadet Corps. You know, and I can remember to this day getting called up when I was whatever it was and going to report to this. We had 2 sergeant majors there, and you had to report. I know, do you still have the Corps or not?
Yes, still running.
Army Cadet Corps?
Yeah, still running, still into the Fusiliers. Yep, the Royal Fusiliers.
Sorry?
Harry, are you in it?
Yes, no.
No, but it's still running, Bobby.
You still run it, do you?
Yes, yeah, still running, still into the Royal Fusiliers. I gather, yeah.
And well, I was in initially the Scouts, and I loved the Scouts, and I was a peewit or whatever it was, went camping with them. And of course, during the war, you know, as I say, the only people who had cars were crooks or doctors. So we cycled out to Chorleywood and in the war, and because we were still getting bombed, you see. And there was one, I remember playing cricket against, in fact, Morven, who was stationed, in fact, at Harrow, extraordinary then, and sheltering under a tree when the sort of German bombers came over, you know, and that was in 1943, 44, you know.
Incredible.
Because things were still happening then. And there were these precautions that you had to take if the sirens went, which they did, because most of it had stopped by then. You know, it wasn't the peak of the bombing, but it was still going on occasionally.
Can you remember what the procedures were? What did the school advise you to do in
I think we had to go down into the underground, and we had to go down underneath. But I think we only had to do it once or twice. Do you remember, Douglas?
Indeed, they had all the water pipes underneath and the trapdoors along passages, and we used to queue up alongside the trapdoors, disappear on the plug hole, as it were, and wait till the all clear siren went. I remember that vividly when the bombers came over during the day. There weren't too many in those days, but certainly we were evacuated into the bowels of Merchant Taylors School on those occasions, I must say.
Remarkable. I understand that you guys you enjoyed 2 consecutive unbeaten junior years, Bobby. Is that right? In rugby football, do you have any memories of those games?
Which games?
The juniors.
Your juniors. You were unbeaten for 2 consecutive years, I gather.
Well, we had two years, and as I say, DD, I was lucky enough to get into his side, and as I say, we were unbeaten. We got 350 or whatever one year to 60 and 300 something to the second. I was captain in the second year, and Douglas, in fact, came in. You may not remember Douglas.
No, I'm afraid my memory is flawed in those times, certainly.
Here we are.
Is that the
I
record?
think Nick's sharing some of the a photo with us of the junior matches. So quite remarkable. So
I exaggerated. It was 236. I apologise.
you only considered
weren't
10
bad
points.
See that Harrow's scratched after
Sorry?
having been beaten up the first time.
What I love is beating Dulwich 47-0.
Yeah.
Because Dulwich and St Paul's were always the big games, weren't they, Douglas?
They were indeed, I must say.
I can remember this day.
What was it about the St Paul's fixture that you most look forward to?
St Paul's. We and St Paul's, you know, were the old school,
Indeed.
old London schools, you
Absolutely.
know, and in those days, they were just number one enemy, if you like. As we became OMTs, the OMT and the old Paulines, there were games you did not dare lose, you know. And Dulwich, of course, was a much bigger school. I remember then we were about 400 boys. Dulwich, even then, were sort of 800 or 900. And I can remember, I forget it was whether you were playing, Douglas, in the game, in the seniors, when we drew 3-3 with Dulwich on a sopping wet day. And Ken Saxon, who was then the coach of the first, came in and said, "You're all a lot of heroes. We'd fought them to the last inch." Do you remember that? I remember what?
It was a very, very wet day, as far as I recollect.
Very wet day,
yes.
pouring with rain. And these Dulwich boys, they were unbeaten, and we weren't damn well going to lose. And we drew 3-3.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Do you remember that, Douglas?
I do indeed, yes. I remember Dulwich was one of the sort of superior schools that didn't lose rugby against Merchant Taylors. So it was a good feather in our cap to be able to draw with them, I must say. It was a fixture that we were lucky enough to have, really, because they were a superior school in rugby to us at that time, certainly. I don't know what the situation is now, but certainly they were the prime rugby school in London, as far as I recollect.
We don't play them anymore.
Don't play them anymore?
No.
We had a fixture last season against them, but I believe that was their second team. But we won that match last season. But yeah, just looking at the fixture list, there are quite a few similar teams there. I'm assuming WGS stands for Watford Grammar.
I think so.
Our second used to play Watford Grammar, you see, in those days. I mean, the big games were St Paul's, Dulwich, Epsom, Watford Grammar, the second used to play, just as when Eton came along. Harrow were always good, weren't they, Douglas? We had some tough old games against Harrow, you know, both home and away. And but then Eton started playing rugby in my time, and they came along and asked for a fixture. And I remember it was either my last but 1 year, and they started playing, as I say, against our second. But Harrow were a tough side too.
Yes, we just remember the sort of going up the hill at Harrow on the hill just to sort of play against them, and you're fighting against them in terms of their particular pitch, as far as I remember, on that side of a hill, not quite on the side of a hill, but certainly not flat like ours were at Merchant Taylors. Difficult proposition, as far as I remember, certainly.
Imagine. What memories do you have of each other as players? Was there anything you particularly admired about each other's, the way each other played the game?
Oh, I think we always looked up to each other and felt that we were learning something from each other, I felt. And that's my recollections. You always have someone to look up to, and I'm sure I looked up to him, certainly, very much so.
You reckon Bobby was a decent player then? You don't?
I think he was okay, actually.
Okay, good.
Yes. He
Well, I
was,
remember debating whether we should play Baker or not, but in the end we decided to play him. We thought he had some promise, so we thought we'd bring him along.
Were there any particular tactics that you employed against the better opposition? Was there anything notable about the way that you played the game as a side?
I honestly can't remember that. It's a long, long time ago, and I probably wasn't very much a tactician, really. I just lose my way around, I think, the field most of the time, rather than play tactics per se. But I honestly can't remember. Probably at half time, you had a few things to say to the team if you were captain, and probably from that point of view, you had ideas, but a long time ago now, I'm afraid.
Nick Latham's sharing a picture of you, Douglas, and I think you're seated to the left of the schoolmaster here. Is that right? Is that Jackson?
Jackson.
So would that be?
Can I say this? Douglas always had this natural ability. I remember, as I say, I was a year ahead of him, and he came along, and from day one, he just had this ability. I mean, quite honestly, if it came to racing, I was faster than Douglas over 100 yards, but over 10 or 20, he beat me by 10. Douglas was so quick off the mark. He was very, very quick. He had this ability to change direction. And even, I can remember him even, as a young boy, I mean, I was a wizened old so of 14, he was only 13. But even then, he had this ability, to change direction and to put that first 10 yards, 20 yards, and to beat people on the outside. He just had that natural ability from day one. Where he was terrible, he couldn't kick. I mean, even I used to take the place kicks at school. You were never a kicker, were you, Douglas?
Not very good, I say. I wasn't.
But he had this natural ability from day one to alter his direction, to pace, to be, it was over that first 10 or 20 yards. That's where he made these gaps. And he did this, and later on when he was in the Lions, if you look at the picture of him in the Lions playing in South Africa, he went out there as, if you like, the spare back. He ended up playing full back in nearly all the games against South Africa. And what he did was he made those spaces. He was able to take people on and then to beat them on the outside, and he had that ability. He had that ability even as a young chap of 14 to be able to do that.
Remarkable.
And it's something I think you're born with, but he always did. He was quite brilliant at that.
Well, thank you for saying so. I don't believe it, anyway.
Right?
I wonder, Harry, if is there anything you'd like to ask Bobby and Douglas about from because I know that you've got a number of questions.
Yeah, so I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on your sort of training and what form that was in, because I know these days we train on a Monday and a Wednesday, and we have sort of different sessions in the gym, and there's a lot of stuff during the week. So I was wondering what it was like for you guys.
Well, my impressions were that I was very lazy, I think, probably in my training, and was limited to Tuesdays and Thursdays as far as I recollect, and that was on the playing fields, not so much on the main playing field outside the clock tower, but down in the meadows, as it were. It was a preservation, that first 15 pitch on the front, and it was sacrosanct, and people walking across and trying to cut off corners were severely reprimanded for walking across the rugby pitch there, I must say. So most of the training went down below the pavilion on the meadows areas, and that's where we sort of trained, as it were, rather than on the main pitch, certainly. Yes.
Did you have any sporting heroes? Was there anybody you particularly looked up to in the game or in wider sports?
Well, I think Johnny Wilkinson was one of my sort of heroes, as it were, and I always envied him rather than tried to sort of. But I always thought that he was a magnificent player. And what else? Some of the little French darting players, they were fantastic. I always thought when right. Our college used to have a French trip in which holidays were there. Any one of the holidays we used to go over there and play about 3 or 4 games against local teams. They were probably the 2nd division there, and the college used to be fairly even with them, and that was a great experience. Staying with French families and having to talk French all the time, which is a rather imposition, but that was great fun. And of course, the university went on French tours as well to play against the bigger sides down in the southern parts of France, the Pyrenees area. So those were some of my sort of great memories of playing rugby at uni, I must say. Mm.
Wonderful. Yeah. Was there anybody you particularly admired or you looked up to when you were
well,
young?
In cricket, I was lucky to go. I went to Cambridge, Pembroke, and I joined the same day as a man called Peter May, PBH May, who later, of course, went on. He was one of the youngest people ever to play cricket for England and captain England. And we, in fact, we read economics the first year, and he lasted, I think, 1 class. He wasn't noted for his brains, but of course, right. He was one of the most prolific cricketers ever. He was captain England, you know. He'd been at Charterhouse. He'd played for their first, I think, at 12 or something, you know. Right. And he and I were very close. And a man I'm very close to still is a man called J.V. Smith, who played on the wing for England. Well, he was in my side. He was in the Cambridge side when I played, and he was only about 5. He's still only about 5'8", 5'9", and but he was as fast as anything. Like, you know, as somebody said, you know, I'd have knocked you over. He said, "You'd have to catch me first." But that was in the old days when perhaps wings were given more room. There he was, J.V. Smith, who later became chairman of the Rugby Football Union, and or president, whatever it is. And our captain was Glyn Davis, who was the Welsh fly half, one of the Globe brothers. He was in the front row for England trials and so on, you know. Mike Archer, who was again a great Irish player, you know, he was then the up and coming centre for England coming through. You know? I mean, we were so lucky in those days to have people like that. But we're all older. We'd all been in the army. I mean, I was, you know, I'd been in the army for 2 years, and everybody else had. You know, our average age, because of that, was higher, and lots of us had got much more experience.
How did you find that readjustment, Bobby, after national service? How did you find that going to Cambridge? Was that a jolt, or how did you feel? How were you treated? Sorry?
What was a jolt?
When you went after national service, when you went to Cambridge, how did you find that?
I loved it. I just had 2 years in the army, and you know, that had been a great experience. And I went up to Pembroke, what was it, 49 or whatever it is, and we'd all been in the forces. You know, I'd only had 2 years. A lot of people then, I mean, if you look at that front row of the Cambridge then, 1 or 2 of them had gone up to Cambridge at 25, 26, because they'd been, you know, in the army or forces and released much later. And I remember standing on the steps outside my college when I first went up there, and there were 3 of us there. One had been in the army, sorry, 2 in the army, 1 in the navy. You know, we were all, if you like, blooded a bit, and we were just utterly thrilled and delighted. And I loved my school, and I had a fantastic time at Cambridge. The only time I didn't like was losing to Oxford, you know. But
Can I ask, did you play against each other in the varsity?
but it was we were all thrilled. You know, then it was a privilege. You
Sure.
know, it was a privilege, and you felt absolutely wonderful. We're still rationing, of course. In those days, you had to eat in hall because you were still on 2 ounces of meat a week, and even clothes were rationed. One forgets that, but you got on with it. You made the best of it. You know, it was wonderful.
Did you play against each other? Did you face each other in the varsity?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. Can't remember any who did.
When you played in 51, Douglas, didn't you? Is that right?
No, 51 and
And-
and 52. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. We had the sort of the South African contingent playing before then, the Hofmeyrs and the
Oh,
and the
Lord, yes.
Van Reinevelds and those groups. They controlled Oxford at those days, so I had not much chance in nudging those young men out of their positions, certainly. So I played in 51 and 52. I played against Cambridge, certainly, as far as I recollect.
Mhm.
Yes.
Obviously, it was a strictly amateur sport, wasn't it? Rugby union.
Totally. Yes,
What did you both end up doing after university? What business careers did you pursue?
I went into a London firm, which is offshoot of my father's. He was in the Petsali Coal Company in Alexandria, and their head office was in London, in the square, not the square, the circus, one of the circuses, called Wilson Sons and Company, and he organised for me to start there. So that's where I started, and had probably 3 or 4 years there, and eventually I didn't enjoy city life very much, and so I moved and became a little school teacher at a little tiny prep school in the countryside near Aylesbury, and spent a couple of terms trying to keep little packers under control, and eventually I was sort of whipped into High Wycombe Grammar, and High Wycombe Grammar School said, well, we'll come along, seen that you've been teaching down there, we'd like you here. So I took over the rugby in High Wycombe Grammar, and ostensibly taught some geography and geology at that time. So I still enjoyed it, and I then went off to Oundle at a later stage, and that's where I finished my teaching career up there.
Right.
Until I came to Australia. I had 2 years in Australia on exchange and went back.
Right.
Thought this was a bad country, so I came out for good at Scotch in Adelaide.
And I believe you taught some Australian rules football at AFL, which is
I tried to, but not very successfully, I don't think, because of course the Scotch College in Adelaide was a rules player, and I introduced rugby to them, much to their chagrin, I think. So I took a few of their better players away from their Australian rules team, but it lasted for 2 or 3 years, and that was enough, I think. And so I opted out of that because it wasn't very successful, because Adelaide is not a great rugby city, and I think probably 2 or 3 schools we played against, that was about it. So it didn't last very long, I must say.
You went into business, is that right? From what I gather?
I didn't go into business. When I left Cambridge, I'd read law, but lawyers then, it was a stuffy old business, and I didn't want to sit behind a desk. So I joined a most wonderful company as a trainee metal box, and they sent me all over the place. And I was at, business is the wrong word, for 2 years. It was jolly good, because they gave you a jolly good training, you know, working on the factory floor and all that kind of thing. But I was able to play rugby, and I went around quite a bit. And strange enough, I was playing better when I left. I was offered a job by another company who offered me about 3 times what I was getting paid at Meadow Box, and a car and everything, so that I could play midweek, because I kept on having to turn down. I kept on being asked to play for midweek sides, but I kept on having to turn them down because I was working at Meadow Box, and they offered me, but I decided I'd stick with them, which was a great thing. But they sent me to South Wales, and I had the most wonderful time for about 18 months playing. I joined Swansea initially, which was then one of the top. They had Clem Thomas, RCT Thomas.
Yes,
who later
indeed,
captained
amazing.
Wales. He was an old buddy of mine, and I played a few games for them. But then again, they wanted me to play midweek, and I couldn't. I had to make the decision between rugby and my career, and I decided my career. So I played for a side called Swansea Uplands, and they were fantastic because there were people like myself. We had an old WASP centre again who worked and so on, and we used to go and play all the villages in Wales, and we played the second division sides. And Clem Thomas even raised an international side, play for a charity for us on their ground. We beat them. You know, we were jolly. I loved South Wales rugby. And then Middlebox sent me off into East Anglia, which wasn't quite the same. But I played a bit up there. But my career, I gave my career first. I had the opportunity of basically being paid to play rugby, but I decided my career was more important.
Absolutely. In terms of, but I understand you both played for Middlesex, is that right?
Yes, I played for Middlesex for some years.
Right.
And I captained Middlesex some, I'm not sure what years they were, but a couple of years I captained the side. And we never got very far in the championships. I think we got as far as semi-finals or something like that, but we never got to the finals, as far as I recollect, anyway.
Douglas, is that what catapulted you into the London side, the London Counties side, to play the tour?
Yes, I think that's playing for Middlesex and then playing for London was a sort of a step up, as it were. So the sort of the counties like Surrey and eastern counties, etc. They were the sort of the London sides to be picked from, and I was lucky enough to be picked from the Middlesex side that I was playing for at that time. Surrey, of course, was another of the counties that we played against, because I'm not sure what happens now, but there was a sort of a county championship in those days. I don't know whether it still goes on.
Yes.
Yeah. And then there were probably 5 teams in the southern division, and Middlesex was one of those, and I was lucky enough to captain it for a while. So that was nice.
I was watching some of the footage yesterday lunchtime of the 1953 match against the All Blacks. Do you have any memories of that game?
Not at all.
No?
Not a single one, no, I'm afraid not. Can't think. It was Twickenham, presumably it was.
Yeah, it was I think I just wanted to drop in. I think it was the last time the Welsh beat the All Blacks that year. So
really? I see.
Yeah, apparently. So it was as an Englishman, I thought it was it lived long in my memory anyway. So for that reason, but no, I mean, a remarkable game. People like sort of Bob Scott playing for New Zealand. It looked a huge crowd.
Yes.
And I understand you, Douglas, you won your first cap for England in 1955 at Cardiff at the Old Arms Park.
Yeah, I think I was 55. It was just the 1 year that I got my cap. So the four games of that year, I managed to play, and that was the first one that I had, and not quite the last, but the first of 4 I think I had. Right. Of course, I got a couple in South Africa, which I was lucky on at fullback in those days. So that was fun too.
Well, and there's you at Twickenham, I think, playing for London.
Oh, gosh, yes. I love that badge of the cross. Short.
Quite good looking then, Douglas.
Dashing.
dashing around.
Who's the little one behind you, Doug? Is he about 3'6"?
Yes, I know. I'm not sure.
It could be JV Smith, could it?
Well,
Well, he's got. Look as if
Was
he's got. a long
JV
head.
in that side?
Yes, it was. It might have been.
JV, I say, he later became president there. I still meet with him. He was in my side at Cambridge, and as he said, people say to him they'd have murdered him. He said they'd have to catch me first, you know. And he was like lightning. But I agree, these days he probably couldn't have survived.
he was one of our guests of honour at the centenary celebrations, JV.
Was he?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
What would obviously this summer is a Lions summer. I think the Lions are playing their first their first match of the tour today against Japan up in Murrayfield. I mean, the 1955 Lions are a brilliant side, aren't they? They are remembered as one of the great Lions teams. And here you are in the back row, Douglas, top right, as it faces us.
Yes.
Can I just ask, how were you told? How did that? There was a huge hoo-ha about selection this year in this country. How did the selectors let you know that you'd been selected for the British and Irish Lions?
I honestly can't really remember, but I think probably not only by letter, but by changing rooms and said,
right,
you'll be coming. And I think, as far as I recollect, honestly, I can't remember.
Okay.
I must have had a letter of some sort, I'm sure, you'll be selected to go. But I haven't got that letter now.
I understand there was an age restriction that year, and all players were under 30. So people like Jackie Kyle and Bleddon Williams and so on, they weren't on tour. Is that right?
I didn't realise that. You know that more than I did, but that's probably why I went. I'm lucky enough to.
No, well, I was certainly not. I wasn't implying that. I'm sorry. I'd read something yesterday, and it said it was a strange, particularly because the current Lions captain is 36, and it sort of struck me as an unusual tactic by the selectors. But they obviously picked a fantastic side. I mean, you, Cliff Morgan, the Merediths. Who else? Obviously Tony O'Reilly, Jeff Butterfield. I mean, an absolutely sort of stellar cast of players. So Robin Thompson was the captain, I'm led to believe.
Yes.
Dickie
Tony O'Reilly, of course, was a sort of the star of the team.
He was a very young man, is that right? He was still a teenager.
Yes, he was still a teenager at that time, but he went down well with the girls, as you could imagine, and his hair. So altogether, he was the sort of the standout personality in the team. I think he was, certainly.
Right.
Yes.
I understand that Jeff Butterfield did a lot of the training. Was it very different?
Yes, he was at one of the Midlands. Physical education schools, wasn't he, as far as I recollect? And he took control of most of our training, and he was virtually the person that made sure that we did our step-ups, etc. So that's as far as I recollect, that he controlled our training, certainly.
Was it a very sociable tour?
It was, yes, very much indeed. There were lots and lots of opportunities of as I say, getting to know the South Africans, and we were fated here and fated there, so we were very, very lucky indeed, I must say. 3 months, a long time, and I think it was delightful. I was very lucky indeed to get picked on that side.
I mean, as Bobby has suggested, rationing only ended in England in the United Kingdom in 1954. So what was the food like in South Africa in 55? Was it?
It was very good, as you could imagine. They looked after us very well indeed. And it was a case of making sure that we had the best. In fact, when we went into restaurants, we had a separate table and separate food just about. And we were fed with lots of meat and the rest. So we were really looked after incredibly well, I must say.
Fantastic. I'd heard a story that Phil Davis, the England centre, bought one shirt on the tour. Is that right? And I wanted to clarify if this was true, that he washed it in the sink every night and then hung it up.
I honestly can't verify that. I wouldn't be at all surprised.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Douglas, did you play more games than anyone else on that Lions tour?
I think I'm probably very close to it anyway. If I didn't, I played in 2 of the tests, and
yeah, and you were in the midweek side a lot as well, weren't you?
Yes. I played in a lot of the country teams and the state teams as well. So against them, I don't know the actual statistics of how many times I played, but quite a lot, I must say. Close to the top of the table, as it were, a number of teams, number of games I played, certainly, or matches. I played in Johannesburg about 2 or 3 times, which was rather good, and played all over the place, which was great. It really was a wonderful tour.
You were the first Lions to fly, I gather. No other tour.
Yes, I think we were actually. Yes, because mostly we went by Union Castle boat, I think, in the 50s or early 50s, and we flew and got there quickly and were able to play more games and etc. So that was good, I must say. We were really fated.
Well, I understand. I think it was the first tour to have a sort of press corps that followed you around. I mean, Bobby, did you follow the tour? Did you follow Douglas's progress whilst he was in South Africa for 3 months?
Yes, I did. I mean, we'd obviously been very close, and we were just, the OMTs then, of course, were a very strong rugby side, and we used to meet together regularly, of course, then. And don't forget, in those days, the OMTs were still raising 11 sides a week, all OMTs. I mean, for years, when I came back to Metal Box Semura, when I came back to London, although I basically had to give up then, I was still on the committee and I became chairman, but we used to meet regularly at a pub in Pinner to pick the OMT side. And up to the sort of late 50s, we were still picking 11 sides a week, every week, and special weeks against the Wasps. And I think Isha, we picked 13 sides, and every one was an OMT, and we used to sit in this pub there, and the captains were there, and I was never captain. I could never afford the time, but I was there, and every week we picked 11 sides to play, and against the Wasps, who were old enemies, favourites. We'd played them since 1890 or whatever it was, and I was also fixture secretary for years for the first 15, arranging all the fixtures against the Gloucesters and so on, because I'd played against a lot of them, knew them. But in the end, we had to give them up when our teams went down. But
right.
I kept in close touch, and because of that, kept in close touch with Douglas and what he was doing. And, he went, as he said, off to Australia in the end. But we've always been buddies, haven't we? And his sister, who was one of my dearest friends, dear old Beryl. Used to keep you under control, didn't she, Douglas?
Yes,
or tried to.
Yeah. Yes.
I wonder.
Well, forget how strong the OMTs were, until I think life inevitably changed when we moved from Durrance and so on. It was such a huge source of society and belonging, and we had all our cricket sides as well, of course.
Yes.
Hockey didn't exist then, I'm afraid. We'd hardly started playing then. I know it's all changed now naturally, but cricket were very strong. But
Yes.
I can remember to this day picking 11 sides every week in the pub in Harrow, every one OMT. And that was one of the reasons that we were strong, because just like nowadays, I think one of the great strengths of New Zealand and Irish rugby is so many of them have played with each other from school days.
Sure.
And they
Yes.
die for each other. And rugby, and we would die. And Douglas, you and I remember that famous game beating Gloucester.
Yes.
Because we always used to play Gloucester on Boxing Day and Bristol the day after. And,
Oh,
we normally,
Of course.
and the Shed used to love us down at Gloucester. And we normally had a close game, but one year we won. Do you remember, Douglas? And there was a famous incident. I don't know whether I dare tell it. In the middle of Gloucester, there's a place called the New Inn, which of course was built in, I'm not changing the subject, was built in about 1200. We used to stay there the night before and then go on to Bristol. And having beaten Gloucester, we'd had a few beers in the pub. We were sitting down and Douglas was with us and he was sharing a room with a man called Ian Hinton, who was a great OMT. Do you remember this incident? And
I
Douglas
think you do, I'm afraid so.
went in to spend a penny into his room and then Douglas never came out. And we heard a bang and we went in and there Douglas, instead of going into the door into the toilet, and in fact gone into the door in the cupboard, which had collapsed on top of him. Do you remember that, Douglas?
Yeah.
I'm afraid I do. I'm afraid I do.
It really does. But
Bobby, what goes on tour stays on tour.
well, I know it's long enough ago now. It's so long ago, Douglas. They were great days, weren't they?
Well,
And we had
indeed.
some great ties. We did, didn't we?
Well,
Do you-
the idea of playing Gloucester one day and Bristol the next
Quite.
doesn't fill you with glee, does it? It's hard work.
Daunting.
I just wondered, Harry obviously has, Harry's a stellar player, I have to say. I mean, Harry had the misfortune of being coached by me in early years. And now he's actually-
what? Sorry.
Well, no, but he's captain of rugby, and I've always enjoyed watching his progress in the stool. And Harry, I wondered if you had any questions about for Bobby and for Douglas about whether they watched the modern game and what were their thoughts on rugby were today.
Yeah, I guess one of the interesting things is seeing how rugby's developed over the years and how the game's changed. So I was wondering if you could tell us maybe a little bit about how the game was then, sort of the style of play and things like that, compared to how it is now.
Oh, I think it's a much faster and brisker game these days. And I think probably the whistle doesn't blow as much as it used to. I think probably a lot of our games were punctuated with whistles. That's my impression. I might be wrong there. So I think it's a much freer flowing game now than it was in my day, a long time ago. That's my impression anyway, whether it's wrong. And I'm not sure how violent it is these days. Is it violent, or is it a fairly peaceful type of occupation?
I think there's less skullduggery. I think it's fair to say.
Yes, I just wonder what goes on in the scrums these days, and contrast to what happened in our days. I'm not sure whether it's cleaner and more gentlemanly. I don't know.
How much did you weigh when you were playing, Douglas? About 11 stone, 12 stone?
I was 12 and a half, about
13 and a half.
12 and a half, 13, around that sort of weight. I've maintained that weight most of the time, I think. I haven't put too much on. I think some occasions I went up to 14.
They're a bit more than that these days in top level.
Yes, and
Bobby, you were in the second row. How much did you weigh? Did you 14 and a half, 15?
It was 14 and a half, but it was interesting. I still got from my, I've got my list and I've got my old sort of rowing things from Cambridge. And strange enough, I was the heaviest man on the river at 14 and a half stone. And there were lots of Olympic oars who were 11 and a half, 12. And nowadays, of course, they're 15, 16. But remember, we'd all been raised in the war of rationing, as I say, with 2 ounces of meat a week, and we've been raised on fruit and vegetable, and diet was so totally and utterly different, you know. And this carried on right through till the 50s and 60s, you know. The food was so totally different. I was then, you know, a relatively tall man. Now, you know, I rank in the middle somewhere.
You shrunk a bit, Robert, you think?
Sorry?
You think you shrunk a little bit, do you?
I've shrunk a little bit, yeah. Afraid so,
Yes.
Douglas.
Well, you're looking pretty good. I
It's been I have to say, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you both. Johnny Taylor's just appeared. I just wanted, if there are any questions you wanted to ask Bobby and Douglas, Johnny.
Well, I just think it would be a nice thing to finish it here, because we're all part of this wonderful community that is merchant tailors, aren't we, from different generations? But perhaps Bobby and Doug, can I ask you what merchant tailors means to you? I think Bobby's already given us a feeling about what it meant to him to be at Merchant Tailors, but what does being an old boy of Merchant Tailors, what does that mean to you both? And then maybe we'll ask Harry what he thinks. Bobby, what do you think? What does being part of Merchant Tailors mean to you?
Well, I'm crying a bit. They were the most fantastic years. I loved the school. I've already said it. The headmaster did a fantastic job, and the master did. I loved my years there. From the first day I went to the school to the day I left, I was lucky enough to represent them at a whole series of things, and I loved every minute of it. And I've always been I've been also lucky enough, like Richard, to have been president of the OMTs, and I've been so proud of, I'm forever grateful to the school, and I still have OMT. Derek Hockaday I should be talking to this week or next week. Remember old Derek, who was a hooker with us, Douglas, you know, and
yes,
I still talk to him every few weeks, and old Richard keeps me on the straight and narrow, but you know, to me, it was one of my life-changing experiences, and I should be ever grateful for the school. In my time, it was a fantastic school.
That's wonderful. Doug, what would being member of Merchant Tailors mean to you?
Well, I think it really made me what I am. I think that I look to the school as leading me in the right direction and showing me the way to go, and also the friendships I developed being a boarder, and being a boarder with parents abroad meant that the holidays were void as far as I was concerned. I was always looked after by friends who had me in during the holidays, and so I met a lot of the schoolboys who were day boys, and they took me in as a sort of as friends, and made me really sort of feel very much at home, and this is where your home is, etc. And so I was very, very lucky indeed to be looked after in that way. So Merchant Tailors, to me, I still have a wonderful picture of the school in my mind, and the wonderful times I had there. And I really do feel really duty bound towards the way the school looked after me, and the way that the kids themselves, the friends that I made, really looked after me as well, because my parents were abroad, and I stayed in various places in the holidays with various relatives and things. So I was really appreciative of how I was looked after when I was at school.
That's lovely. And Harry, as the current generation of Merchant Tailors, how would you sum up life at Merchant Tailors? We're living in obviously really difficult and challenging times for us as a school. We've been closed down for the first time by a virus in 500 years. We've had to revisit things that we haven't had since the 17th century. But for our guest, Harry, how would you describe what Merchant Tailors means to the 2021 generation?
Yeah, I suppose it's really the opportunities that the school gives to you. And I think they've remained during the pandemic and through my time in Merchant Taylors. And I think this is one of them. It's being part of that wider community that at first you don't realize. I think reflecting on this and listening to Bobby and Doug, the amazing thing is how traditions haven't actually changed too much. At first, when you were talking about coming in on the train from North Harrow to Moore Park and walking down the long drive, you know, boys come in hundreds down the long drive every day. And I think it's amazing how those traditions just remain to these days, and you don't really realize it. And I think that's really amazing.
Yeah, I thought the comment about the first 15 pitch being sacrosanct and anyone walking across it getting told off, that has not changed one bit. We still tell the boys off today. I just think those are lovely comments on which I think we should finish today's conversation. I can't tell you how grateful we are that you've given us an hour of your time to share these lovely memories. It would be fair to say that Bobby and Doug are just two stars of a wonderful generation from Merchant Taylors, of which the current generation are immensely proud, and we send our greetings and thanks to you both for sharing your memories and for making us feel so proud of what you and your generation have achieved as Merchant Taylors. So on behalf of all of us here at Northwood, we send our greetings to you both. We do hope to chat to you again at some point, and that you'll stay in touch with each other via Zoom. So we bid you farewell and thank you from us all for being such wonderful guests today and for sharing such wonderful inspirational stories. Thank you so much.